There was no countdown. Hello, LinkedIn. There was no countdown, Ryan. We're live. Welcome. And today we have a very special guest, Andy Lambert. I've been looking forward to this. I'm going to have to stop shouting. I'm in an office in London. So, Andy, hello.
Hello. Good to see you.
I was looking forward to this one. We've just been having a chat about the back of Andy there. You can see we thought it was his business plan, but actually it's his wife's to-do list. So anybody like paint the fence, sort the garden out. So welcome everyone on LinkedIn. You have tuned into the right place. This is the Tribal Impact weekly LinkedIn live show. And this week we're talking all about content. And if you've got any comments for Andy, he's a bit of a LinkedIn superstar when it comes to content. Heads up company called ContentCal. We love that business. We work with them. We partner with them to service our customers and help our customers. So big shout out to ContentCal. And thank you, Andy, for joining us. Do you want to give us a bit of an intro?
Thanks for inviting me. I'm Andy. I'm one of the founding team at a company called ContentCal, which kind of does what you probably assume it does, given the name ContentCal, so calendar full of content. We've been running that. We started that 6 years ago now, and in December of last year, we were acquired by Adobe, which is all very exciting. And now, we're part of Adobe for this next chapter of our journey. So very exciting.
Oh, 6 years. Is that what it's been? 6 years.
Indeed.
I love to see that you're all branded up there, Andy, with your Adobe top. So you are fully integrated.
Yeah, absolutely.
Free swag. And also, I want to give you a platform for your book. I haven't read it yet. It's on my list, but I know, and it's a good book because all proceeds go to the charity. Do you want to give us a plug on that before you start?
Just so happens I have it here in true plug style. To be fair, you don't really need to read it, Sarah, because it's everything that you already know, to be honest. So it's just why B2Bs could be a whole heap better at social and how they could be. And, it's both talking about why it matters and why B2Bs aren't quite where they should be in terms of their social media opportunity and how they kind of unlock the opportunity of social really. And then a kind of framework and a process to get them into that position. Also, some tactical tips as to how to convince the higher ups that social media is worth the investment, of which I know is always a hot topic in social media.
Right? Convincing leaders, getting leaders active. These are all questions that we often get all the time, but that's not the topic today. Today, we are talking about employee-generated content. So I'm going to pick your brains around this one, Andy, because I know content is your thing, and I love your weekly updates. Your little, if anybody doesn't follow Andy, you should do that. Just get those amazing animated videos every Friday from your living room, are they, or the office? I can't.
From the living room,
Right. So talk to me about employee content, Andy. What's your view on employee-generated content? It's a relatively new phrase. So
what's my view on it? My view on it, certainly, whether you're B2C or B2B, and particularly a lot of my kind of narrative today is going to be through the B2B lens, because that's typically, I guess that's the preserve of where most of yours and my audiences are really. My view on it at a very high level is that it's an essential component of a content strategy, and we'll dive into it in more depth, I'm sure. But realistically, there's two elements of it that really have the most impact, which is one, increasing reach, both from like a very tangible element from, of course, your wider employee base are going to have more followers than your company page. Clearly, that's a fact in most cases. And of course, if we just think about LinkedIn specifically, we know that content from a personal profile will typically outperform that from a company page. Whether that's LinkedIn's algorithm or whether it's just human nature, don't really know conclusively, but either way, reach is dramatically improved when content is generated from an employee. So that's one side of it, reach. And the other side of it is resonance. And resonance is much more kind of the intangible thing. It's about the elements of trust that's built through content. And trust isn't built through a logo or corporate branding, etc. Trust is built through human interactions. And I talk about this all the time. Like as marketers, we often overcomplicate the process of marketing, which is fundamentally simple. It's a very human endeavor. And we often try and over analyze and over rationalize human behavior. And we talk lots about funnels and consumer journeys and all that stuff. But actually, it just comes down to very simple fact of like, as humans, we make inherently flawed decisions, whether we're buying something complex like a new ERP or whether we're buying a new desk lamp. Basically, we satisfice all the time, which is a kind of portmanteau of sacrificing and then satisfying, because we just go for the most convenient, most available option. And the way it becomes most convenient and most available is because we built trust and because we've come to know it through interactions, through word of mouth or whatever. So I could carry on forever on this topic, so I'm going to stop myself now. But at a high level, that's my views on it.
Oh, and I've already taken some notes. And hello, Amanda. Thank you for joining us, and Vanessa and Ryan's on there as well. If anybody's just tuned in, we're talking about employee-generated content. Please pop your comments in the chat, and I'll put them to Andy as we go through. A couple of things you mentioned there about the content, and I think it's more relevant for B2B because typically B2B, the content can be a little bit boring sometimes. And I think when you humanize the content or you create a voice through employee-generated content, just makes it a bit more, well, you say resonant, we say relevant, and relatable, all of the R's. There's a blog post in there somewhere. And you also reminded me actually of a white paper that I read. It's a few years old now, but it's still relevant. Edelman and LinkedIn, they wrote a paper around thought leadership and enabling the C-suite to read it, and how important it is and how disappointed B2B C-suite are with thought leadership that's not actually relevant or resonant. So that's a good white paper to have a look at. But also what popped to my mind was an example with B2B. It's not B2B, it's John Lewis, actually, which is anybody not in the UK, is a big department store here in the UK. And they get their employees on the shop floor to create content. So they get them to put, outfits together and put clothes together and take a photo, and they feature that content through their own brand social channels, which is really cool. So they've got like shop floor ambassadors. Best Buy was doing this in the US years ago. They were out there solving customer problems over Twitter. Employee generated content allows you to scale the reach. Brilliant. Hello, Lisbeth. Hi, Dave. Hi, Audrey. Oh, boring and braggy content. It's not always about you. Love it. So, Andy, let's dig a bit deeper. You touched on it already about trust. And we talk a lot about authenticity, relatable, resonant. How important is that in good content?
Well, I mean, you shared, I think it was a blog post actually that I read from you, Sarah, which focused on the Edelman Trust Barometer piece. And I thought that's always something worthwhile considering for anyone else that's not familiar with Edelman's Trust Barometer. And you see the rise and increase in trust of particularly my CEO was a bit that really jumped out for me. Is like, people are looking to the leaders of an organization to be the bastions of trust. And clearly you're looking for those individuals. As trust in governmental institutions is at an all-time low, you're looking elsewhere for guidance. So you're looking for leadership, right? And, whether that's thought leadership or however we describe it, we're looking for those around us to take a stand and represent their views on something. And typically it's always been fear that's held people back, fear of not knowing what to publish, or is something okay to publish, or, how will I be perceived? So that element of fear is still inherent, right? And it's still one of the main things that holds people back from really getting involved with employee generated content. But authenticity is something that all of us crave as human beings, right? It's become a buzzword in business, but again, it goes back to that point that I said earlier, is that us as marketers, we just overfixate on trends and trying to rationalize stuff and think, authenticity is a big trend now. It always has been, right? We've always looked for people that we know, like, and trust. We look for people that we can rely on in times of difficulty, or people that we truly know, or it comes across that they know their stuff. So that's where our trust will gravitate towards those people that help us. Once again, it's not rocket science, this stuff. And, this is it's become such a cliche in business now because this video does the rounds. But, it's still one of the best things to think about when we're thinking about authenticity. Is just going back to Simon Sinek's start with why, right? Humans communicate from the inside out. We care more about the emotional impact of something than the rational performance of something. Communicate with the why at the center and the what at the outest bit. And that's where B2Bs typically get wrong, because we're always communicating in features and benefits, thinking that our buyers, like I said, whether they're buying an ERP or whether they're just buying some social media software, thinking that people make decisions based on, a rational comparison of features. It's just simply not the case. It's just not true. So that's why authenticity becomes so essential to both how a business goes to market and why employee generated content is so important, because that's the quickest way to get to the heart of a business, to understand their purpose, their missions, their values, their beliefs, and truly understand, can this business help me? And, I don't want to use ourselves as too much of an example here, because there's other brilliant examples, but it's the best thing that we did to drive our growth over the last 6 years of building and then selling ContentCal. It's just constantly put out content related to how to do social media and every element of social media, put that out into the world ungated and completely for free, because you wouldn't believe the impact that has over the fullness of time. Absolute nightmare to measure the impact of that and attribute. You can't. But fundamentally, it's just, if businesses don't do that, they're just going to miss such a massive opportunity. I appreciate I've answered about 1 million different questions in.
No, well, I'm taking loads of notes here. Now, it's very interesting you talk about that, because we have talked about Chris Walker before on this call, who is absolutely adamant about ungating everything. No, you can't track leads anymore. MQLs, SQLs, get over it. There's a modern marketing method that's happening. Stop trying to attribute everything to a lead. This is groundbreaking stuff, not for small businesses, but for big businesses that need to shift and change the way they think about marketing. So, that's a whole other conversation, Andy. And you've been doing it for 6 years. So there you go.
Yeah, exactly.
You talked about fear, right? So I wanted to dig into that a little bit about employee fear. And I think there's a bit of organization fear as well, about letting your employees loose on creating content. So can you just expand a little bit more on that? What's stopping employees and what's stopping organizations trusting employees?
Yeah, so what's stopping employees? There's a mixture of conflicting priorities of time, right? So people would want to post on social if they understand what's in it for them. So I think there's still we haven't quite got the value proposition right as far as employee generated content goes. We've been talking about this for a long time, yet so few businesses have properly realized the opportunity. There's notable exceptions that run in our circles, Sarah. Ericsson, IBM, Colt, good shining examples of employee generated content in B2B, but it still really isn't mainstream, despite the fact that we've been talking about it for ages. Because I think there's an element of fear, which I'll talk to in a second, but there's just an element of we haven't quite incentivized correctly, I don't think. And I don't know exactly what the solution is, but really, we, like with any form of action we want to get someone to take, we need to make sure that the incentives are aligned to that. Whether those incentives are financial, are otherwise personal gain orientated, i.e., the perception of that individual both inside and outside the business, or whether it's tapping into people's competitive spirit through gamifying the process, for example. All of those things are kind of our inherent human drivers that I think have been missing from a lot of employee generated content initiatives, where we haven't thought enough about actually why would my staff want to do this? Why do they even care? Why will they give up their own time? Because everyone's got sales targets to hit, or other objectives or KPIs or OKRs that they're all targeted on. Why are they going to take their time suddenly to create content to serve the purpose of their employer necessarily? So unless the value proposition is right. So there's that part to it too. But picking up on the fear element, the fear is real for anyone doing social. And like you and I post content all the time, but I still feel like the flutter in my heart of anxiety when I post something, because you're posting something that is true to you, but you don't know how it's going to be received. And there's still, and I don't think until you, and I used to play music. Like, side note, I used to play music a lot. I used to be a professional musician, and like even though I'd been doing it for years and years, I still got so nervous every time I went on the stage. And I was asking someone, like, do you ever stop getting this nervous? And it's like, no, I think when you stop getting nervous is when you stop caring. So naturally, when you so that's a really hard hump to get over, to say, like, right, I'm putting out my personal views into the world, and it might not go down that well. There's absolutely a very real risk here. It's a risk for the individual that's doing that, and it's also a business orientated risk, because yes, you might have your social media guidelines and all that good stuff, but the fact is, they can be interpreted still a number of different ways, and there is still huge reputational risk for a business. So those risks are real. The fear is real. And I don't have at least anything I can say or anything I could suggest to make that go away overnight. The only thing that makes it easier to get over the fear is, one, making sure incentives are aligned so that everyone recognizes the opportunity. So, like, even when you're feeling, oh, should I post it or not, that you actually realize, no, there is a purpose for me doing that, whether that purpose is personal gain, as in like you're standing in the business, or personal gain for other reasons, and an organizational gain we've already spoken about the potential of that. Only when those incentives are completely understood and the opportunity is completely understood is when we recognize the fear, but actually, we will still proceed with it anyway. So I think, in a very short way of putting a very long ramble, is just all about, if we can get over the fear of how people will be perceived, and a way of doing that is by making sure we can set as many kind of guidelines and frameworks as possible. But I don't think it's still ever going to go away.
No, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I mean, we see this with customers all the time, and fear is the biggest thing that's holding them back, especially individual employees, because they don't want to be seen as a bit silly or saying something controversial, or getting themselves into trouble. So they'd rather not post anything at all. And especially if you start working in regulated industries, it becomes even more serious, right? So, so I think for me, there are, you mentioned about social guidelines, but a lot of companies, what they can start to do is put examples of what good looks like, because sometimes the employees don't know what good looks like. So give them examples. Don't just tell them, do this, don't do that. Show them what good looks like, and show them what bad looks like, and what they should avoid doing. So I think putting some practical examples around that, but also recognizing, we've talked about this before, but recognizing that employees go on a maturity journey. You're not going to have an employee that's ready to write a massive blog post. That their next best action might be, I'm going to start liking some posts, and and then we'll work it up from there, and we'll just increase the maturity of that. So just a thought that came to my head actually about employee generated content. When we work with organizations looking at their advocacy analytics, we see employee generated content perform much better than any other source of content into the platform. Third-party content, employees love sharing peer content, right? So when you start analyzing at that level, encouraging your employees to create thought leadership, create content that resonates, that flies much better through their peer network than other sources of content.
100%. It's for organizations, right? And certainly larger organizations, they've got like a sleeping giant of opportunity within their business, which is user generated content. So whether that is customer generated or generated from your employees, is the thing that I think is going to drive all of social moving forward. We're in the fullness of time, we're going to see pretty much a redundance of brand orientated and initiated content, where everything will be user generated, because the fact is, that is always, we've known this from the start, like everyone's known this, is that user generated content is always going to outperform everything else, because 92% of people look to those that they know for product or things to buy recommendations. Basically, influence on products is all influenced by people that we know. So the only way to light a fire under word of mouth, because let's be clear, word of mouth is the number one way to grow a business, period. So the only way to light a fire under that is by leveraging user generated content. That's much harder for a smaller business that's just getting going, because they need a whole bunch of customers to start using their product, which is hard enough. And then two, talking about their use of the product, which is super hard, right? So those B2Bs that have a huge base of 15,000 employees, not saying everyone's going to get on social and talk about how amazing their organization is or what they're doing or the products that they're in, the projects that they're working on, but a proportion of them will. And that is the opportunity, because it's those in those peer networks. As you know, we spoke about Chris Walker already. He refers to it as dark social, right? So in those peer networks of those comments and the recommendations, that's when the magic of social happens. As you know, as social media folk, we've over-indexed on, you know, what content should we put on our company page, build a content calendar and keep our content publishing, you know, and I built a product that is a content calendar, right? You know, there is an element to that. But realistically, what I'd love to see business do is reduce that reliance on that that self-generated content calendared orientated content and focus more about what's coming from those both inside and outside my business and what they're saying about it, because I think the skills going to become more in the curation rather than the creation. But the thing that will underpin that is having creative guidance, and that fundamentally is probably the most important element to it. So creative guidance for what those customers can create or what those employees can create, because that's a big barrier, even for like people like you and I that create content all the time. Still today, when I was thinking of my latest TikTok post, I had to go for a walk because I had literally no idea what I was going to talk about. And that's someone who's very comfortable with doing this kind of stuff, because if we just need to put that kind of creative spark of information like, hey, employees, you should talk about this product or talk about the latest project that you're working on, or, you know, what your latest initiatives are, or something like that. Just give them that kind of framework to work within. That spark of inspiration is all that kind of creativity really needs to allow you to really unlock both, you know, user content and employee generated content.
And actually, really smart organisations, and we've been working with one that's been doing this, is feeding social listening into this. So quite often, you know, organisations will set up social listening around brands and competitive listening, share a voice, all that traditional good stuff, but set up topic social listening, right? So set up themes, so nothing to do with the brand, and feed that to your experts and just say, you know, last month this really hit the news and it started flying. What's your perspective on it? Can you create some content? And it can be a video, it can be a blog, it could be whatever content, just a LinkedIn post, text post, doesn't matter what. But that agile, connecting your listening into the content production process, I think is really key, because that, like you said, you had block, right? You didn't know what to say, but if you can help spark that, marketers can do that. So.
100% agree. And I think that's really going to be the skill set of that social media team. That really is that. You call themselves the creative directors, right? Because they're the ones that will be taking the insights from all of those disparate sources, you know, whether it's social listening or whether it's, you know, keyword research and all that stuff, the things that are topically incredibly relevant, latest trends, etc. Taking all of that and assimilating that information and then providing that as some kind of inspirational framework for those employees to create content against. Because, you know, that really is where a social media person's stock in trade and skill is not necessarily in actually like doing of creating the content. It's taking all those disparate sources of information and creating that into some form of narrative, and a story that could be posted across multiple channels. So really, if the focus then shifts away from taking all of that insight into that narrative, and rather than just fixating on just putting it out on our company owned channels, how then do we package up all of those different topics and stories that we could share and provide that as, you know, kind of creative guidance to our employees for them then to create content against. That also kind of mitigates against the fear factor that we spoke about. It mitigates against, not completely against, but mitigates largely against the risk factor as well. So yeah, I think it's that inspiration led with, like you said, that's a really important point about having that, setting the expectation of what good looks like. And that's where it's so important that, you know, this isn't just a narrative that's led by the social media team. We have to see other champions in the business extol the virtues of personal branding on social and employee generated content. Ideally, that would come from the leadership team, you know, like the CEO of Colt, as we've referenced earlier, expressing their views on LinkedIn. So it becomes like an expected behavior. But not everyone can make that change from the top down. I do appreciate that, though.
No, not always easy. We've referenced dark social, which I think is quite interesting, because we've already talked about an Edelman LinkedIn paper, the Trust Barometer, Chris Walker. None of that stuff is measurable, right? No one can attribute that to anybody else, but you guys have all heard that today, whether it's on the podcast or through this LinkedIn Live. There was what else I was going to ask you. Oh yes. So on Monday, it was National Pet Day. There is a reason for this story, but I think this is a really interesting and easy way your employees can start to create content, right? So some organizations that we work with, you talk about incentivize and have a little competition. They run competitions quarterly, 6 monthly in the advocacy platform to get people to, it's National Pet Day, be part of our conversation, share your pet picture. You can't go wrong with that. There's no right or wrong answer. There's just lots of R's, right? And this is the sort of thing that you can get employees creating content that isn't right or wrong or opinion led, but then actually what the social teams do is then replay some of that content onto the brand channels. So they curate that from employee generated posts, and then so this is a great way that you can start connecting low risk employee generated content into high valuable culture content for your brand social channels. So I love this topic, Andy. Yeah. I love this topic. Right. Okay. So you've mentioned leaders and getting leaders. So let's talk about budgets and how you can convince leaders to pay for this. Yeah, we need to get our employees generating more content, but the marketing team's got a load of budget for content. What do you mean? How do you start to shift this in big companies?
I think the piece of information I would direct any leader of a business to, because I reference it loads in the book that I mentioned. The LinkedIn, the B2B Institute on LinkedIn, a brilliant resource, because not many leaders truly appreciate what marketing is, especially in B2B. We've talked about it already. We've talked about like the frustrations that so many marketing teams have with B2B, and even at ContentCal, where we're pretty kind of progressive in terms of our marketing strategy, we found ourselves falling into this short-term trap. And that is one of the fundamental issues that underpins B2Bs, which is like, the fixation on short-term results, where if it's not delivering results this quarter, it's getting kicked into touch. And, a lot of B2B businesses have this kind of sales-led culture where the sales team really drive a lot of those decisions. And that kind of, further influences this short-termist culture where marketers, and Chris Walker speaks about this a lot, where marketers then are really just like extensions of the sales team doing all of this stuff that's focused purely on lead gen. And it's really easy to turn up the wick on lead gen if you really wanted to, right? Throw more money in Google ads, throw more money on Facebook ads, throw more money on display, programmatic, whatever. But are they of quality? Does it move the brand forward? Probably not. And this is where the issue comes into it. And this is why I'd always kind of direct leaders to think about this, is that B2Bs dramatically underinvest in brand building, right? You'd look at a B2C, brand building budget is typically about 60%. Look at a typical B2B, it's 17%, which is just shocking, right? How can you grow a business over the long term if you're not investing in the long-term growth of a brand and it's all going into short-termist results? Basically, you dig a pit for yourself, which gets bigger and bigger every single month, because the gap between your share of market and your share of voice gets bigger and bigger. You've already spoken about share of voice, and in that B2B Institute on LinkedIn, they talk about the importance of share of market. So basically, how much market share you have versus your share of voice. And when you see this in examples of businesses, the annals of business history is littered with examples like this. This is the core of disruption, right? Because a business gets entrenched in the modus operandi and what they do, and they just focus on hoovering up as much demand as they can. So they're just capturing demand. Where the young upstart, the startup comes along, starts generating demand, operating in a different area, recognizing the most important factor of business, I think, is that 95% of any given market are not in a market to buy. So really, if you're focusing all your efforts on performance orientated and conversion orientated activity, you're only really going after 5% of the market, those that are actually in market to buy. And we fell into this trap at ContentCal because we obviously, you know, you're a young startup, you're 6 years in, you make mistakes, massively over-indexed at a few points in our history, over-indexed on performance. And you forget about all of that demand that still needs to be created, where the 95% of a market just aren't looking for something right now. They don't know something like this exists. They don't know they need to consider it. And that's where all of the brand building efforts go into it. And there's just this massive mismatch between where the opportunity is, i.e. that 95%, versus where the budgets are. It's completely out of kilter. And I think only a well-informed conversation plus, giving some data, like that's why I keep on referencing the B2B Institute, because really helpful, for marketers to take that to leadership teams and have a very serious conversation about the underinvestment in brand building. Because it takes someone a little bit brave to take a bit of money out of the paid or performance marketing pot. But unless we do, fundamentally, we're just going to be fighting an uphill battle every single month to try and hit the lead numbers. And if we do hit the lead numbers, because let's be honest, they're pretty easy to game if we want to, we do hit the lead numbers, then we wonder, we just end up blaming each other. You blame marketers for leads, you blame the salespeople for not converting the leads, and the problem just goes on until you try and address the problem at its root, which is we need, quite simply, it's more nuanced than this, but quite simply, we just need to invest more in brand, i.e. 17% is not acceptable.
Yeah, brilliant. Some bold statements there, Andy. I think you nailed it, though. Yeah, you are, right? Yeah. No, honestly, I agree with everything you're saying. And I mean, I've worked in enough sales-led organizations to say, where's my next event? What campaign are you doing this quarter? And I'm like, if you're expecting leads to drop this quarter, like you said, you can game it, right? You just chuck a load of money at paid. You can get as many click-throughs as you want. You can get lots of downloads if you want. Are they ready to buy? No. So, and this is where you can start to scale up. Right, we've got a question here. So what, in your opinion, Andy, is the ideal mix of internal content, for example, company announcements and promotion, to purely employee-generated content? Many employees have a comfort zone of just sharing company news because it's a safe place to be. So,
what a good question. I think that also, it does miss an element. It says that the question, I'm sure the question's more nuanced than this, but it kind of says that it's kind of one or the other, where it's not really that case. I think in both cases, it's kind of missing the opportunity. By employees just sharing company announcements, it's fine, but it's not quite where we want employee generated content to be. Ideally, we want employee generated content to be much more focused around the expertise of that individual, focus much more on value additive content. So I'll give you an example I will come back to answering the question, but I think it needs a bit of context. So Rise at 7, a B2B orientated agency, well, a bit B2B and B2C, but brilliant agency. And they are fundamentally marketing themselves in a B2B capacity. They invest very little in, their own company announcements. All of the content is created through their employees. And it's not just through the CEO, it's through the relative function leaders. And they're all representing their expertise in different ways. So, for example, the head of PR at that agency will be very vocal on LinkedIn about, the future of PR and all of the elements all the nuanced elements of how to build a PR strategy for a business. So they're kind of creating thought leadership, which I've never really liked the word, but I can't think of anything better. But basically thought leadership around PR. You've got the CEO explaining about, what it's like to grow the business, showing like even her you won't want to go this level, but like showing her bank statements of when they made the first million, for example. And people feel the journey, they feel the growth. Going in the first New York office as Carrie was opening up the first New York office, absolutely love it. They're marketers talking about how to build a brand strategy, for example. They all demonstrate their expertise as individuals that work for the business. As a result, it lifts up the whole business because naturally you're attracting people to that agency with a number of different needs, purely because you're using the diverse viewpoints of your employees. You don't need everyone to do it, but you do need some key leaders, not necessarily leaders by seniority. I mean, leaders by people that are willing to stand up and do it. It could be the most junior folk. And that's why, employee generated content provides a real good opportunity for those in your business that are kind of superstars, but they're kind of undiscovered superstars, right? So it's always employee generated content. I never like when you just think it has to be the CEO doing it. Having it some kind of like some shining stars for within the business is massive opportunity. So going back to the question about like the right mix of company announcements versus like employee generated stuff, as much as we can avoid company announcements, we should. Of course, there'll be some of them, there'll be events, but we're going to put them in a different context. And this is where event marketing becomes much easier, because everyone can give their own take on, let's just say we want to market an event, we're exhibiting at a big summit. We don't want to just say, oh, I'm really thrilled to be going to whatever expo. Everyone sees through that nonsense. Really, what we want to be thinking about is thinking about what's your own perspective of going to that event, which is like, oh, I'm excited, a bit nervous, but really excited to be speaking at this event. Who else is going to be there? Who are you excited to meet, for example? Being able to create some dialogue around that event, tagging some of those individuals that are at that event, for example, being able to start some form of dialogue. And that for me is what employee generated content's about, not necessarily saying, hey, we need to promote this. Can everyone bang this on their LinkedIn pages, please? I don't think it's not necessarily, the mix isn't what we need to be concerning ourselves with. It really should be the execution of it, I would say.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that you said there about it. There's so many companies are still doing that. It's like, can you just pop this out on your LinkedIn profile, even though it's not relevant to you? Where I've seen a lot of mistakes happening is people saying, these are our strategic topics for the company. These are the people that may not even have a good social profile or network, right? But we're going to match that person up to that topic, even though they're not interested in it and it's not really their core business, but they're a leader in the company, so they have to be out there doing it. It's the wrong way. It's the wrong way to do it, right? If they're your strategic topics, why don't you get out there and listen for the people that are already talking about those in your company and match those to the topics? They don't have to be in exec positions. I'm getting on my soapbox now, Andy. I'm gonna have to calm myself down. But it's just that, and please don't try and force people to own topics. So this is where it goes wrong. These are the pitfalls. Now, Lisbeth, I was going to just mention on that as well. I think where a lot of people, coming back to the fear piece at the start, people don't understand what their content strategy is or what they stand for. So when you were talking, Andy, about finding your why, I think it's, you work in communications, then that is your topic. Don't go sharing stuff about the latest, IoT press release that we've just done last week, because your audience is not going to be interested. Or maybe that's a bad example because they might be connected to journalists, but you've got to think about that. Think about your content match, your strategy. So
exactly. And like, it's not like, just to add to that point, it wouldn't be too much to ask to say, like, we're doing a campaign around AI and machine learning and putting out an internal message inside your organization, chuck it on Slack to say, who's really passionate about, AI and ML, for example, and come forward because we'd love to involve you in a campaign, and then brilliant. Then great, we've got people that genuinely care about this stuff. They'll have typically a follower base, because they've spoken about this stuff already. They'll have a follower base that's interested in this stuff. And they'll also create better content with different narratives because they're thinking about it in a different way. They've got their own view on machine learning and the future of, algorithms or GPT-3 or whatever it might be. That for me is the opportunity. And that's why I kind of copped out of answering that kind of percentage mix question, because fundamentally it's driven by your campaigns and then finding the right people to deliver it and put the right narrative on it, rather than just thinking of it just as, your employees as a distribution channel.
Oh, it's turning it all on its head. It's perfect. Brilliant. Right, I've got 2 more questions to get to, and I know we're running out of time. I'm going to skip that. Shall I skip that one? No. Fostering an environment. I think we've touched on this already a little bit, that this is about creating a culture, right? Now, it's all right for companies like that. Well, you're part of Adobe now, so you're a little bit bigger. But small businesses, it's quite easy. But how do you start to create this in the culture? How do you start to foster this as part of the culture, this employee-generated approach?
I love it. I love this question. Start, like with anything, start small. Find anyone else in the business that shares your passion about this too. Latch on to that one person. That one person will probably know someone else, and just create a little community. Call it the social lab. Give it a name. Make it feel like, unique for a club, for example. And because when something it feels like, hey, we're part of this kind of club, we're part of the social lab, it starts to feel like, hey, what's that? And suddenly, you start to change the cultures inside out, because you can see it as some kind of like skunk works project, if you will, a bit of a side hustle that's going on with those people that are truly interested in this. That's how cultures start. Cultures start through movements, and movements start just by people that share the same worldview. So by getting together and finding a collective of people that share the same worldview, that have the same mission and vision and purpose as you, that think, right, we need to get our business to be more active, and we want to be able to express our views on social. Start small, and then basically invest in that movement, as you will. So when I say invest, I don't mean just investing. Don't mean investing money. I mean investing in time and expertise, and then have that as like a thing you do every Friday afternoon, for example. Get together, talk about ideas, riff on things you could do, experiments from the week, that kind of stuff, and treat it like a little kind of mini startup, if you will, which is all about experimentation, figuring stuff out. And it becomes, when people are working on something that seems exciting and embryonic within a business, naturally it has a bit of a gravitational pull to it, because people start to go, oh, that's quite exciting. Why am I part of this? And that's the way I would suggest.
That is absolutely brilliant. It really reminds me of my time at SAP, and in 2010, and anybody who's listening that was part of that, pop a thing in the comments, because we did exactly that, right? It's like, I almost use like a wave. It's like the wave gains momentum, and people will want to be part of it. And I love the social lab, run experiments, start small. That's not the first time we've had that advice. Actually, we've had that several times on these sessions. Start small, mini pilot. Get the change, love it. Right, we're going to talk about TikTok, Andy. Talk about TikTok, because I've got as far as downloading it, but I haven't. So talk about TikTok and B2B, please. Just and you mentioned that you were doing a TikTok earlier, so I'm interested.
Yeah, well, I'm on TikTok and trying to figure this out too. There are days where I think I'm getting it, and there are days where I just want to bang my phone into my head and think, like, I don't understand it. It's my job to understand this stuff. It is super hard to try and grasp, because it is like, this is where cultures and movements are formed. So there's just so many things that, it makes me feel old. I'm 36 and I feel old by going on TikTok. No shadow about it. It makes me super uncomfortable. Does that, for that precise reason, mean I'm so determined not to let it get away from me? I'm like, when I first downloaded it, I was like, what the hell is this? And I'll delete the app, forget it, just hope it goes away. It's not going away.
It's not going away.
It's not going away. It's got 25% of the social media market share. I'm like, right, I've got to be on it. And the more I started, like any social media experience, like the more you start to follow people that are good, that you respect, that you actually really like the content of. Chris Walker is someone else that I follow. Makes it sound like I only have one friend on social. But yeah, he's someone that I follow. And then, of course, when you start following people like that, you start getting recommendations of similar kind of B2B thinkers. So then, then your feed gets a little bit better. So that's definitely helped. There is still a massive creative barrier, and that's why I'm trying to get into the habit of creating at least 3 TikToks a week, just so I can just get in the habit of trying to figure out how to get over that creative barrier. It's a big culture shift, even for me, because I'm pretty, au fait with video. I'm regularly on, as you say, the LinkedIn video, very much on a horizontal, but I've now had to teach myself, flip that camera. It's all about vertical video and LinkedIn's pretty much the only one where vertical video is not the thing yet. But that being said, I just took TikTok I did, for my weekly roundup, because I just did it on TikTok, did it in a different style. Usually my LinkedIn videos are 3 minutes, just did it in 1 minute, which kind of forced me to like get the points out super quick, which you can imagine, given from what I've just been speaking about and how much I've been speaking, is a struggle for me. But I managed it. So like the weekly update of all social media stuff done on TikTok. The great thing about TikTok, when you create the video and you can kind of stitch together lots of takes, TikTok editing tools are actually really, really good. It's amazing what you can do on TikTok. The captions are pretty good, and all of the different stickers and creative effects you can add to that. It's basically like using kind of a mini video editing tool. So it's pretty smart. And whenever you post something to TikTok, it saves it to your camera reel as well, which actually is a genius move from TikTok, because it means that watermarked TikTok logo gets everywhere, but it also saves a huge amount of time, because you can then take that video you've just produced natively for TikTok, and all I did was just put it straight on LinkedIn and Instagram. And incidentally, because I literally just repurposed that video and just put it on LinkedIn, and it was my top performing weekly roundup post of the year. So clearly vertical video still goes down well on LinkedIn. So I think for me, we can't ignore it. It's going to be more important. You can see businesses are going to struggle for sure, because this is the final thing I'll say on it. Businesses will struggle for sure, because it's more human than any other platform, right? You can't hide behind stuff. You can't hide behind linking to something. You can't hide behind, a nicely produced image or video. It is about low production value. It's about conveying a message super quickly. Realistically, even though you can do 3-minute TikToks, it needs to be within a minute, really. Conveying messages super, super quickly. So with that, there's a big creative barrier. But to be honest, businesses are starting to think about this, in a really different way. Like, I would implore anyone just who's on TikTok to look at the language app Duolingo. They're not a B2B business, but they got 3.7 million followers, and it's all led by just their social media manager, who's dressed up as their kind of mascot, which is an owl. You'll look at that and be like, oh man. But like, it's been the biggest brand building initiative for them, and they put very little money into this at all. And it's such an incredible growth driver for them as a business. But it really does raise the creative bar. And it also makes businesses start to, it goes right back to the start of this conversation, Sarah, where really employee generated content is going to become more significant, because the channels that are growing faster than anything else demand employees to be there, as opposed to a business.
Fascinating. And also, just to add to that, I think, that also comes back to what you were saying about brand building is going to be the big thing, right? So organizations in B2B, they're going to need to start thinking less about lead gen, more about demand gen, more about getting front of mind with customers before they're ready to buy, through great content. The other thing I would say on that as well is employees, they're already on TikTok, right? So I think there's so much focus on LinkedIn as the B2B platform, but I think we cannot ignore these other platforms of Twitter, TikTok, emerging platforms. They're out there already on Instagram, sharing photos of their pets, and, they're already creating content, guys. So businesses need to really think about this and how they can harness the power and help them do it better, give them the confidence, take those skills that they're doing on Instagram, bring them over onto other platforms, and share that experience a bit more. I am curious though, Andy, before you go, what sort of video? I'm going to find you. That's going to be my next job. Everyone on these LinkedIn Lives is kind of like on my TikTok journey, right? So I'm going to follow you and Duolingo. That's going to be my next job.
Go for it. And that's,
I was going to say, what sort of things do you do on there? Do you share tips, or how are you using it? Because everybody thinks TikTok's about crazy dancing, and I don't think it is.
Yeah, you won't catch me dancing, that is for sure. So I'm trying to commit to 3 a week, and 1 post a week. The first post of the week is always going to be the weekly social media news update, which seems to go down pretty well. Just by from a basis of comparison. So I've got circa 15,000 followers on LinkedIn. And my video yesterday has achieved, I think, 1,020 views or something like that, basically 1,000 views. And then on TikTok, I have the grand total of 103 followers. And my LinkedIn video is already over 800 views. So it just goes to show, like, the organic reach is just too good to ignore right now. So the opportunity is absolutely massive, even with 0 followers. I remember I did a little split test when I had 0 followers. I don't really put any time on Instagram as well, so I kind of use Instagram Reels and TikTok as a comparison. When I first started TikTok, I was like, I'm going to put the same video on both platforms and see how they did. I think my Reel got about 13 views, my TikTok got about 420. I was like, okay, wow. It's just night and day difference. So that organic reach is just, we go back to that first point that we mentioned right at the beginning of reach. It's just too good to ignore. So anyway, going back to the point, round up once a week social media news update, because it's cool, it's evergreen. I can constantly talk about the news, so it never gets old until people get bored of hearing me. Two is that I do a 1-minute video of a snippet of just like a key takeaway from each chapter of the book. So I've got some thoughts on that, so it's easy enough to then put that into a smaller video. And then the third one of every week is more about something I've discovered during the course of that week, or something a little more kind of personal viewpoint, or it's a bit of a mishmash of stuff. So basically what's going on in my head, and that's the kind of stuff on Friday. Really, it's just there's no dancing. Occasionally I'll put some music to the back of the track, the behind it, because it sounds a bit better. There's bucket loads I could be doing more. I should be following trending sounds. I should be following trending hashtags. But at this point, going back to authenticity, I'm just going to carve my path here, but doing the things that I feel comfortable with, and see how TikTok reacts to that, basically. And the other thing I have learned, which is the final point on TikTok, which I think is a real cool thing, is that it's really cheap to promote content too. So if you want to grow followers or grow your number of views on a video, it's kind of like akin to Facebook boosting, but I think that's really powerful, and you can start to grow your follower base quicker than I'd expected, to be honest.
Interesting. Right, yeah, I'm getting pulled in, Andy. I might have to do that. I learned today that Twitter's doing boosting as well, so you can convert your profile to a professional and do instant Twitter boosting as well. So
I knew about the professional profiles on Twitter. I didn't realize that was linked to boosting.
Andy, do I know something you don't know?
Never admitted that.
Right. Mission accomplished.
Oh, blimey.
Exit stage left.
Yeah.
All right.
Not from you, Sarah. Yeah. I see it.
Right. I think that's a good time to finish.
You win.
One up. Right. Everyone, thank you so much. Andy, I knew this was going to be a good one. I am absolutely thrilled, honestly. Thank you so much I could listen to some of the phrases you said. I've written them all down. Thank you for sharing your insights. I could listen to you all the time. So, and also thanks for everyone joining us today. This will be converted into a podcast. It's normally available within the hour, I think. Although, Ryan, don't panic. He's in the background thinking, no, not within the hour, Sarah. Don't commit to that. But yeah, you can follow us. We do these every Wednesday. So we'll be back next Wednesday. And thank you, Andy. Thanks so much. Absolute pleasure.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Take care. Thanks, everyone.